Welcome to the first episode of Coffee with Samso. I'm here with Mark Strizek. Today we're just going to have a brief little chat about the tungsten industry. But I'll let Mark maybe introduce yourself and just let everyone know who you are and what you are.
Noel, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of Coffee with Samso. My background, as yourself, we were both MDs of ASX listed companies that were actively exploring for tungsten and developing a tungsten project. So I spent 7 years with Vital Metals working on the Watershed project, which was ultimately sold for $15 million Australian to tungsten mining. So I guess we've both got some good insights into the industry, and over that time I worked closely with the Japanese government agency JOGMEC, and also got a chance to go into China and see the industry there as well. So I've got an appreciation of it and a good understanding, and I guess as we've got the lemon tree here, we know that it's a tough industry, but it's one that could maybe hold some gems and some good opportunities as well, which we'll talk about today.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting because I really want to touch on your experience with the Chinese, especially because you guys had, when I ran Siberun Resources, our project was quite greenfield. We didn't really have any development issues. I think you guys had, and I know that we've had conversations before, and you've had a lot of work with the Chinese, and obviously you're trying to work on your capex and things like that. Maybe that's quite an interest. Like you said, the industry's a bit funny, a bit the pricing's a bit how should you put it? It's a bit sort of behind a Chinese wall there. Mm-hmm. We're not sure what price is and things like that. But maybe you could share that thought with us about what your experience was in the inner sanctum, if you want to call it.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Noel. So I was very lucky in terms of working closely with the Guangzhou Institute of Non-Ferrous Metals. So we worked with Dr. Zhang and his team there. So Watershed was a little bit different, and thanks to the Japanese partners. So we had a guy, Nakamura-san, and he said, "You've got to go to China because they are the guys that really understand tungsten." And I think predominantly in the West, it had been a mixture of gravity had really been the focus. And the key we went to learn was about flotation, the recovery. And that's one of the things that you'll look at that has caught Wolf was getting that recovery. A lot of because tungsten, and we're seeing this similarly in the spodumene area with the lithium guys, is it has what's called cleavage planes, so it will slime very quickly. So it means that if you're not careful, a lot of your stuff just goes to tails. You can recover a coarse product and the fine stuff just goes away. So I was able to go inside Guangzhou, and we worked with the team learning about the Petrov flotation process that the Chinese, originally a Russian process, but the Chinese had commercialized it. Whereas the Russians would heat everything up, the Chinese would go, well, how are we going to make money on this? We can't heat everything. We'd work on very small batches. So they had this very high intensity flotation that really worked down to some incredible levels, 10 to 5 microns. As part of doing that work, so we worked with Guangzhou from about 2012, and I think it really gave Watershed a competitive edge using X-ray sorting and then having that finished product that could be caught by the flotation product, so allow you very high recovery. But the Chinese were very, very open with us and allowed us to go and see a number of projects, and so it gives you some incredible insights that you could see. The industry was a mixture of, I could call it bucket chemistry, small projects, private and then large state-owned enterprises that were using incredible technology. And what we learned was the flotation process definitely works, and I think all the players that are coming in need to consider it, really, unless you've got some exceptional ability to recover gravity. If you're getting a normal minus 100 micron, you really need to start looking at flotation to recover. And the other area, it gave me an opportunity to see the scale of the Chinese industry, and you've got a mixture of projects which are pure tungsten, but importantly there's also a number there that are tungsten's a byproduct, and that's where you really need to be very competitive, competing with the Chinese that are producing tungsten as a byproduct. And there's a lot of it out there as well in terms of stockpiles, and maybe we can talk about that as well.
I guess, you know, in some sense, with all the other projects that we have in Australia, I know when we were doing Siberun, we looked at a lot of these. I mean, Watershed was, I think the grade was 0.1, is it, or
Yeah, so
lower?
we had an average grade of around about 0.15, but the reserve was a little bit higher, around just about 0.2.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Siberun projects were all much lower, and then we had the Sisson project, which had Molly again, and which 0.6. I sort of wonder, in your opinion, would those take off in the sense of, you know, the grade? Oh, it has a lot of size. I mean, we know that, but I just sort of think that maybe it's, you know, it's a bit low.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I think one of the keys there is this, you know, grade's important, but you know, what I like to talk about is the margin. And with a lot of I mean, we were really focused on, if I put on the vital hat, at Watershed, we were very focused on the X-ray ore sorting technology that allowed you to get rid of a lot of material at large sizes. You know, that's one of the incredible things is, you know, crushing is very cheap. And if you can get rid of material while still attaining very good recovery, then it allows you to have a very small back end where most of the cost is. So I think that's one of the keys, is that as you're looking at projects, you know, you're looking at, you know, can the guys, and that's really all of these projects that have to be beneficiated. You know, as it comes from the mine, you've got to be able to throw away the waste and recover as much tungsten as you can. So that's probably key. And the other thing is to look at is, you know, projects, are they able to produce a clean concentrate? Because that's really important. You know, you don't want to have any contaminants in your tungsten concentrate. You don't want to have molybdenum, because that's a product that makes it difficult for the end user, and you'll be penalised. And the other area is radioactivity. You know, you want to have a very clean product. So when you're looking around at projects, you want to try and get a feel for what the contaminants are going to be, because that's something the end user is going to penalise those guys, and really whether it's going to allow them to be able to market that product easily.
Well, actually, that's a good point, because I've forgotten the fact that when we were doing Kerwin, one of the advantages of Kerwin is that there's no known impurities at that time. It was a clean scheelite project. Sure, the grades look a bit low. But yeah, you know, you can beneficiate it and things like that, which comes to, I mean, I remember the Spanish project. There was one Spanish project, El Monte or someone running it. What's your thoughts on those projects? I think there's another one in Portugal as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple there. So I guess you've got within the Almonte stable, you know, so they're running a smaller project there, and now they're looking at a big one in Korea. But there's also Ormonde, who is part of Oak Tree Capital, and they've got the Barracuda project, and that's running through into, you know, it's in production. You know, I believe if not in production, they had all the capital there, and that was a process there, but they were able to get very good recoveries just using simple jigging, so very large scheelite crystals, and allowed that to be separated from the waste. So it's going to be interesting to see how that performs in production, and I guess they've got some natural buyers there in GTP, some of the global tungsten powders, and also Wolfram Bergbau, who have a facility, an ATP plant inside Austria, and that's one of the keys when we're looking at it is tungsten, probably like we're seeing in the lithium metals and so on. There's a range of, you take your concentrate and then you need to turn it into a product that's useful. So it goes through APT and then into WO3 and then into W powders. So it's a market, you know, you need to be able to push that to the end user, and they would normally have those facilities in doing the conversion.
Yeah. I guess you know, you've got a lot of supply in the sense that you got the New Power, I think, is it, in Vietnam, the noodle makers, that project. Then you got the Shandong one that's in South Korea that Warren Buffett supposedly, or his company, invested in.
Right.
Which everyone then jumped on the bandwagon and said, oh, look, Warren Buffett's in tungsten, so everyone should be in tungsten. And then you have the Canadian one, or it's Mark Tung.
So there's,
but I don't think that's happening now, right? They're apparently they're too deep or something like that, even though the grades are fantastic.
Yeah, look, that's right. So Sandong's part of Almonte,
Yeah.
so they bought that when Wolf came asunder, and so that is currently, they're looking at developing that, and I believe they've got the finance in place, so they're taking out the middle lens there. Then you've got, outside of that, you've also, inside you had Cantung and then Mactung, so one of the projects is shut, and the really big jewel in the crown is inside the Arctic Circle. It's probably going to require, excuse me, a development of potentially up to $1 billion. It was well north of 500 million. So that's where the opportunity is for other groups. And I think you might have been looking at some as well in terms of projects, especially here in Australia, that are kind of on that development ready stage, and the capital costs are going to be significantly lower.
Yeah, I guess in Australia, the one that comes to mind obviously is King Island Scheelite, which is the grades very good.
Yep.
It's 0.7 or 0.9. I think the resource is 0.9 or something like that. Then you have the tungsten mining guys. But what's your thoughts? I mean, are they world class? Are they ready to go, do you think? Or is the market just not quite ready for things yet?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, obviously, having sold the project to Tungsten Mining, you know, they've got a portfolio of development-ready projects, both here in Western Australia and also, obviously, Watershed in Queensland. King Island, as you said, it was one of the last producing Western companies that was selling concentrate to Western users. You know, look, it's always there, and it's tantalising. You know, it's got good grade, and it's got a in terms of, I believe, the mining leases in place, so it's development ready. But it's one of the keys is, you know, getting in that financial package, and it's quite hard. I mean, it's certainly in terms of where things are going with the US and China, you know, there may well be a willingness on the end users outside of China to look at that, paying maybe a strategic premium. You know, so for them, you know, getting access to concentrate, because a lot of them do have, yes, they use scrap, and they can also take in powders, but they want to be masters of their own destiny and want to be able to access tungsten concentrate. And that's one thing the Chinese won't sell you. You know, China is definitely moving up that value-added curve, and what they're really after is ultimately being able to sell is carbides, because that's where the real money is. And I think yeah, the Chinese and the 5-year plan, and looking forward with this Made in China 2025, you know, they have an ability, seeing as they control so much of the market, is that they can just restrict supply of concentrates and some of those intermediary products that'll, you know, cause people like Atlas Copco, GTP, Wolfram Bergbau, will cause them to wither on the vine if they can't get access. So that's where I think there's some real opportunity here, and I think, you know, you've been looking at some of the projects as well and ranking them and seeing where they could go.
Yeah, I always liked tungsten because it's, you know, it was a strategic mineral. Although there's only 100,000 tons being used, but there's not too many workable projects in the world. You can count them in, you know, less than 10 probably, less than 5 that in the next 5 years that will get up and running in some ways. So I think, you know, that's where I think there's a lot of opportunities. And when this trade war thing happened, I thought, oh, maybe this could be a catalyst, you know. It's, you know, China might say, you know, it's our stuff. We're not going to be so easily, well, freely giving it away or selling it away. And on the other side of the wall, I guess, you know, they're saying the same thing. So maybe that could prompt that price to move. I think it's is it sub 300 MTU now? Yeah,
so it's a good price.
So I remember, you know, you're saying 300, you could make money depending on how you sort things out.
Yeah, look, definitely. I mean, it's at a level where, you know, the price, I think both sides, the producers and the concentrate makers are pretty happy with that. And that's where, you know, in terms of Australian projects, it looks pretty good as well with where the Australian dollar is. It really gives you a competitive advantage against some of your peers elsewhere, especially, although the US does have some old projects, you know, essentially they're selling into US dollars, where we're able here in Australia to produce in Australian dollars and sell into US dollars. So it gives you a real advantage.
Yeah, especially if the Aussie dollar drops more than where it is, to make things really interesting for the Aussie projects.
Yeah, no, look, it certainly does. And I think one other thing that we're looking at is, this blue sky policy in China, and it's something that you're seeing maybe a perfect storm of factors coming together. It's come from the top, and people. I guess as you and I have travelled to China and we've been inside Beijing and you can't even see the sun, is that people are sick and tired. China's a wealthy nation now, and they're willing to pay the price, and they're willing to enforce the laws to ensure that companies produce to the same standard that we do here. And that's been factored in our costs for a long time. So that competitive advantage that Chinese producers probably once had has fallen away somewhat, and that's where I see, on top you've got that environment and that pricing pressure and that competitiveness that's coming in, because projects here in Australia, you have to produce at a standard that isn't going to damage the environment. And so I think it's potentially game on. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Good point. I mean, I didn't completely forgot about that environmental factor, and you throw in the trade war. And I know even 5 years ago they said that they were already starting this cleanup, and a lot of these tungsten projects were probably needing another 0.1% to make it work cleanly. So I think that's actually quite a good point, because it's 5 years down the road, everyone wants clean, and Xi Jinping is going there with a big stick making sure everyone complies. I mean, look at the iron ore price. Who would have known that we're back to would be almost there now, the same price, right? For the high grade ones. And I remember people not long ago, maybe a year ago, people approaching me to say they're looking for iron ore that's sub 55, but they can beneficiate it to 60s, because they're all looking for that kind of stuff. So well, thanks, Mark. I mean, that's quite a good summary of where things at. I mean, do you have anything else you think you could throw in there?
Look, I reckon we've covered it all. I mean, the other one that's always been tantalising is India, whether they'll be a player, and they've been looking around at projects. And the other one I love is the US infrastructure, in terms of demand for tungsten, because there's so much work that needs to be done there, and if that really gets a leg up and gets funded, that development we saw in China is going to be replicated in the rebuilding of America. So I think there's plenty of things for investors to consider.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, things that we didn't even touch on was possibility of, a tungsten battery that's sort of sitting on the sideline, that whether it happens or not. I mean, if it did happen, it's quite big, because we're talking instantaneous charging. I mean, that will sell like hotcakes,
Absolutely.
But in the building of America, people don't consider it, because everyone's sort of been looking at the China building, they've got that growth and everything else, but the US is just looking for that growth as well. All right, thanks Mark. Fantastic to kick my little project off, and let's see how we go from there.
Righto, thanks Noel.
All right,
it's great.
Thanks Mark.